Margaret thought she was losing her mind. It started on a Tuesday in late autumn, when she woke at 4:47 in the morning to find a wild deer standing beneath the old oak tree outside her bedroom window. The doe's breath formed small clouds in the freezing air, and her dark eyes were fixed on the glass with an intensity that made Margaret's heart skip. In 50 years of living in this countryside home, Margaret had seen thousands of deer pass through these woods. But none had ever approached like this, so deliberately, so purposefully. The creature stood there for several minutes, completely still, watching Margaret with eyes that seemed to hold a question. Then, without warning, she turned and disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness. Margaret pulled the curtains closed and told herself it was nothing. Just a curious animal. Just a coincidence. But deep down, in that ancient part of us that still knows how to listen, Margaret felt something she couldn't explain. Something was about to change. The next night, Margaret woke at exactly 4:47 a.m. And there she was again, the same deer in the same spot, with that same unwavering stare. Night 3, 4:47 a.m. The deer was there. Night 4, through pouring rain, 4:47 a.m. Still there. By the end of the first week, Margaret had stopped calling it a coincidence. Her daughter, visiting for the weekend, watched from the window and suggested the deer might be sick or confused. The neighbor joked that maybe the animal wanted to be fed. But Margaret knew, with the kind of knowing that doesn't come from logic, that this was something else entirely. This deer wasn't sick. She wasn't lost. She was waiting. Every night, the same ritual. Every night, that penetrating gaze that felt less like watching and more like communicating. There was urgency in those eyes. There was purpose. And by the 8th night, Margaret couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was desperately wrong, and somehow, this deer believed that Margaret was the only one who could make it right. On the 8th night, Margaret did something she never thought she'd do. At 4:47 a.m., when the deer appeared like clockwork beneath that oak tree, Margaret opened her window. The November air rushed in, bitter and sharp, turning her breath to mist. And she spoke directly to the wild creature standing in her yard. "What do you want from me?" For a moment, there was only silence. The kind of silence that exists between worlds, between species, between understanding and mystery. Then the deer did something extraordinary. She didn't run. Instead, she took 3 measured steps closer to the house, close enough that Margaret could see the frost clinging to her brown fur, could see the intelligence burning in those dark eyes. The doe released a soft vocalization, not a cry of fear, but something else. A plea. A request. Then she turned her head deliberately toward the dark woods behind her, held the position for several heartbeats, and looked back at Margaret with unmistakable intention. The message was clear, impossible as it seemed: follow me. I need you to follow me. And that's when Margaret saw it, caught in the moonlight filtering through the trees, a white patch on the deer's chest, glowing like a beacon. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. That white patch. She'd seen it before. 12 years ago, on an early summer morning, Margaret had discovered a fawn tangled in a barbed wire fence at the edge of her property. The young deer's leg was bleeding, the wire cutting deeper with every terrified movement. For 3 hours, Margaret had worked in the blazing sun, speaking softly, moving slowly, her hands stained with blood as she carefully freed each trapped limb. It was delicate, agonizing work. One wrong move and the fawn could have injured herself beyond recovery. But Margaret had been patient. She had been gentle. And when that fawn finally stumbled free, when she took those first shaky steps toward the safety of the woods, she had paused, turned back, and looked at Margaret with eyes that seemed to hold something impossible for a wild animal: gratitude. She'd had a white patch on her chest, exactly like this one. Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she stared at the deer standing in her yard, and in that moment, across 12 years and thousands of days, she understood. "It's you," she whispered into the cold darkness. "You remember me." And the deer, this impossibly intelligent, impossibly loyal creature, stood there as if to say, "Yes, I remember. And now I need you to help me save someone else." Before we reveal what this deer desperately needed to show Margaret, if you're already feeling the chills from this story, do me a huge favor right now. Smash that like button if you believe animals are far more intelligent than we give them credit for. And here's the thing. 97% of you watching right now aren't subscribed to this channel. That's wild. If you love heartwarming animal stories that prove there's still magic in this world, Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that'll restore your faith in the incredible bond between humans and animals. Trust me, what happens next will leave you speechless. Drop a comment right now and tell me, do you think animals can really remember acts of kindness after 12 years? I'll wait. Because what Margaret discovered in those dark woods will answer that question in the most heartbreaking way imaginable. Let's continue. On the 9th night, a 73-year-old woman made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone watching. When the deer appeared at 4:47 a.m., Margaret didn't just open her window. She got dressed, grabbed a flashlight, and walked outside into the freezing pre-dawn darkness. The doe waited calmly, as if she'd known all along that Margaret would come. And then she began walking toward the woods. For 20 minutes, they moved through the sleeping forest together, woman and wild animal, flashlight and moonlight, trust and mystery intertwined. The deer led with absolute confidence, following paths that existed only in her memory, constantly glancing back to ensure Margaret was still there. Through clearings where frost sparkled like diamonds. Past ancient trees that had stood silent witness to 1,000 animal dramas. Deeper and deeper into a world where human rules didn't apply, where the boundary between possible and impossible grew thin. Margaret's heart pounded. Her rational mind screamed that this was dangerous, foolish, that she should turn back. But her soul, that part of her that had always trusted the language of living things, urged her forward. The deer needed her. After all these years, after traveling to her window night after night with the patience of someone who believes in goodness, this creature needed her. And Margaret would not let her down. They arrived at a small clearing just as the first hints of dawn began to touch the eastern sky. The deer stopped, looked down at the ground, and released that same soft, pleading sound Margaret had heard at her window, the sound that had haunted her dreams for 9 nights. Margaret's flashlight beam swept across the frost-covered ground, and then froze. There, half hidden beneath fallen leaves and morning mist, was a young buck. His magnificent antlers caught the light, but his body told a story of unimaginable suffering. His leg was caught in a rusted hunting trap, the kind that had been illegal for decades, probably abandoned in these woods and forgotten by whoever had set it. The metal teeth had bitten deep into his flesh. His breathing was shallow and labored. His eyes were glazed with pain and exhaustion. He'd been here for days, maybe longer, slowly dying while the world moved on around him, indifferent to his agony. But one creature had not been indifferent. The doe stood over him now, protective and unwavering, and in that moment Margaret understood everything. This deer, this impossibly intelligent, compassionate creature, had remembered across 12 years the one human who had shown her mercy. And now she was asking, begging, for that mercy to be extended to another. She couldn't free him herself. She needed human hands. Human tools. Human compassion. And she had known exactly who to ask. Margaret's hands shook as she pulled out her phone and called for help, her voice breaking as she described what she'd found. But she didn't leave. She couldn't leave. While they waited for the rescue team to arrive, Margaret knelt beside that suffering buck and covered him with her own jacket. She spoke to him in soft, reassuring tones, the same words she'd once used on a terrified fawn bleeding in a fence 12 years ago. "You're going to be okay. Help is coming. Hold on. Just hold on." And the doe, this magnificent creature who had orchestrated it all, remained too. She stood 15 feet away, watching as humans she should have feared descended on the clearing with equipment and urgent voices. But she didn't run. She trusted them, because Margaret was there. As the sun climbed higher and bathed the forest in golden light, 3 wildlife rescuers worked with bolt cutters and medical supplies to free the buck's mangled leg. 40 minutes of careful, agonizing work. And when that trap finally broke open, when the metal teeth released their grip and the buck took his first shuddering breath of freedom, there wasn't a dry eye among them. The veterinarian examined the wounds and delivered news that made Margaret's heart stop. If they had arrived even 1 day later, the buck would have died from infection and exposure. 1 day. The deer had known they were running out of time. She had known, and she had refused to give up. The buck spent 6 weeks in wildlife rehabilitation, and Margaret visited him 3 times, watching his strength return to his body and the light came back to his eyes. The day they released him back into the wild, she stood at the edge of the forest and watched him bound away, powerful, healthy, free. But the story didn't end there. Margaret spent weeks combing through the woods around her property, and she found 3 more forgotten hunting traps hidden beneath years of leaves and undergrowth. 3 more death sentences waiting to be triggered. She had them all removed. Then she began volunteering with the Wildlife Rescue Service, and her story spread through the community like wildfire. This impossible, beautiful tale of a deer who remembered, who traveled every night to ask for help, who believed in the goodness of the one human who had shown her mercy years before. People began checking their own properties for old traps and hazards. They began looking at the deer in their woods with new eyes, with new respect, with the understanding that these creatures weren't just background scenery in the human story. They were beings with memories, with emotions, with a capacity for gratitude and love and acts of stunning intelligence. One deer's faith in one human had sparked a wave of compassion that would save countless lives for years to come. Margaret never saw the deer at her window again after that morning. But on cold November nights, she still wakes sometimes at 4:47 a.m., not with confusion anymore, but with reverence. She pulls back her curtain and looks out at the dark woods, remembering what happened there, remembering what she learned about the depth of animal consciousness and the power of kindness to echo across time. Through the changing seasons, Margaret catches glimpses of the doe in the distance. She's seen her drinking from the creek with new fawns at her side, teaching them how to survive in a world that's not always gentle. And once, on a misty spring morning, Margaret spotted the recovered buck in a meadow, magnificent and healthy, his leg completely healed, living the life he'd almost lost. The doe was grazing nearby, and for just a moment, Margaret could swear they both looked in her direction, as if they knew she was watching, as if they remembered. Margaret smiled and closed her window, her heart full. Because she understood now what most people never learn: we are not the only ones who remember. We are not the only ones who love. We are not the only ones who repay kindness with kindness, who travel impossible distances to save a friend, who believe, against all odds, in the goodness of another soul. We share this world with creatures whose hearts beat with the same capacity for compassion, for loyalty, for the kind of love that transcends all boundaries. And if we're very lucky, if we're very, very lucky, they'll trust us enough to show us. Kindness is never forgotten, not by humans, and not by the wild creatures who walk through our woods on silent hooves. The compassion we offer into the world has a way of returning when we least expect it, carried through the darkness by those who cannot speak our language but who communicate in ways far more profound than words. True intelligence isn't measured by technology or vocabulary. It's measured by memory, by gratitude, by the willingness to ask for help and the courage to offer it. And by that measure, we have so much to learn from the animals we share this world with. So much to learn from a deer who remembered, a deer who trusted, a deer who traveled through the cold darkness, night after night, believing that one human would understand. And she was right. If you made it to the end of this story, you're part of something special. You're someone who still believes in the magic of the natural world, someone who understands that animals deserve our respect, our compassion, and our protection. So here's what I need you to do right now. First, absolutely destroy that like button. Seriously, hit it so hard that YouTube knows this is the kind of content the world needs more of. Second, and this is critical, if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? We share incredible true stories like this every single week. Stories that will make you cry, make you believe in miracles, and remind you why life is so incredibly beautiful. Click that subscribe button and smash the notification bell so you never miss another story that touches your soul. Third, I want to hear from you. Comment below and tell me, what would you have done if a wild animal appeared at your window every night? Would you have had the courage to follow it into the darkness like Margaret did? Share your thoughts, share your own animal experiences. Let's build a community of people who recognize that we share this planet with extraordinary creatures who deserve our wonder and our care.